This is the lecture titled The Writing Process. You should go through these slides and listen to the lecture before you attempt the first short essay so that you know how I view the essay form in the writing process and you have a better idea of what to expect from the writing assignments in this class. The essay is a very flexible form, and I would hope that by the end of this course you have begun to view the essay differently than you would have viewed it in other previous writing classes. If you go to the dictionary and you look at the word essay as a verb, it means to attempt or to try, and I've always loved that part of the definition. I think it's really important to focus on your essay as an attempt to explain your point of view and worldview. So please think of your essays in this class as works in progress, as something that's flexible rather than fixed. Remember that writing is an attempt and that some attempts fail. To this end, your short essays are rough drafts for your longer essays. You will write a first short essay, then you will revise it and develop it into a longer essay by doing very specific things, which I will point out in the essay assignment to you. And we'll take it step by step, this idea of revision and development. Remembering, of course, that what matters most is that our readers comprehend what we are writing. It doesn't help us if we become so precious about our writing and so attached to it that we refuse to make it more clear, more efficient, and more lively. And part of that is remembering that writing is an engagement with a reader. It's part of a conversation, and if our reader is not understanding our point of view, we need to go back and see what we can do to the writing to make our communication more clear. Part of that is analyzing our subject and making sure that we have a solid understanding of our subject matter. Analysis is the art of breaking a subject into its smaller parts in order to see how those smaller parts contribute to the whole. We do analysis every day in our ordinary lives, and separate from our writing and reading. Often when we want to fix things, we analyze them. When when your car breaks down and you look under the hood and you begin to remove casings and hoses and try to see, from beyond one piece into the next piece and see where the problem is, that's analysis. You're looking at the individual parts and seeing how they all contribute to the whole. In college classes, you are asked to examine how things, and their various things like text, processes, physical objects work. And so you'll be doing analysis across all of your college curriculum, not just in writing courses. Analysis, fine-tuning your ability to analyze, can help you develop your arguments piece by piece. And so for this reason, we focus on analysis when we do our discussion boards. When we read essays and I ask you to respond to prompts in the discussion boards, that is an attempt to guide you through analysis, to make you think of the separate parts of a published essay and see how they contribute to the success of those essays. So when you write your own essays, in college, your professors are going to give you topics for writing. You're very rarely going to be given the opportunity to just write about whatever the hell you would like to write about. Your job is to narrow the topic that the professor gives you into an appropriate subtopic. Your professors don't want book reports. You have to remember that they want to know what you think. They don't want information spat back at them. In high school, often we're given a bunch of information, and then in tests or papers we're asked to just regurgitate, and that's not what happens in a college classroom. In a college classroom, the professor wants you to synthesize the information that he or she gives you with the information that you already have from your experience in the world. And so this should be reflected as well in your essays. They should be a careful balance of information and opinion. They should combine your research with how you feel about that research. You want to know your audience before you even begin writing. And remember that your ideal reader is not your professor. Your ideal reader is someone who shares your interest in the topic. And I put interest in quotation marks here because I know that, we're not all interested in every college class that we enroll in. However, we are more or less invested in the subject material because we are attempting to learn it for a career, or we are wanting to get a good grade. So what I would suggest is that no matter what class you're in and what paper you're writing, imagine that your ideal reader is a peer in your class, someone who has the same kind of investment in the material, who is examining the material for the same reasons, because this is what academics do. They write to their peers. Considering audience also means that we need to choose our words, or diction, and decide on the arrangement of those words or syntax based on the educational level of our audience. We would not use the same language, we wouldn't use the same vocabulary and long sentences for an 8-year-old that we would for an 18-year-old. We would not give the same essay to a person who has 6 years of higher ed under their belt to a person who is still in elementary school. So that's what I mean by choosing diction and syntax wisely. You want to know who your audience is and what their level of experience is before you begin writing. The structure and style of the essay is also going to differ depending on your audience. An essay that you are writing specifically for your professor will probably be very formal and will lack a lot of your personal voice, which is a shame, and so that's why I suggest that you write to an ideal reader who's a peer, because then I think you will end up having a mix of the informal and the formal, and you will end up having an element of your true self in there, which is important for engaging your audience, keeping your reader interested. Also, you must weigh what your audience already knows about the topic against what they want or need to know more about. Your professor, again, doesn't want you to rehash what you learned in a chapter. You should refer to things that you've talked about in class only in the context of what you are trying to reveal in the essay, the information, the new information that you're trying to share. You also want to think about your purpose when you're writing your college essays. You want to remember to ask these questions. Are you trying to entertain? Are you trying to inform? Are you trying to persuade? Or are you attempting a combination of all three? The purpose of your essay is never, because I was assigned to write this by my professor. No professor wants to read a paper that feels like an assignment, honestly. We want to read something that sounds like an engagement with the material. You have to have a better, more urgent reason for writing the essay, or your writing's going to fail. You have to be personally invested in it. That investment in your writing ensures its success. So we can begin to explore ideas for the topics we get from our professors through pre-writing. We have done so far several free writing exercises. I have given you a topic. I've asked you to describe certain periods of your life through free writing. And free writing is, of course, just writing sentences one after the other without worrying about spelling or grammar, and answering the prompt as fully as you can in about 5 or 10 minutes without stopping, just keeping the stream of words flowing. For some people, this is a really, really good technique for pre-writing, and for other people, it feels like a wall of text when they go back to it. They look at it and say, well, I don't really understand, or it's very difficult for me to look at the pieces that I did for free writing and extract ideas for essays from that. So what I would suggest for people who have difficulty with free writing is to consider these other methods of pre-writing, such as brainstorming, which is a list of ideas, phrases, associations with the topic, and looks much like this slide does with bullet points. For those of you who are visual learners, clustering or mapping might work. That's where you have a circle and you put a word in the center of the circle that's usually the topic that you're being asked to explore, and then you branch off from that circle into other circles that have subtopics, and then from those subtopics you have other words or associations that kind of turn into subtopics. This is one way for visual learners to really see the big picture, to see how ideas connect with one another, how words and phrases connect with one another, and follow a train of logic or a thought process. Questioning is a good idea in terms of figuring out what you need to do for your research. You ask a bunch of questions of yourself for the topic, and some of them you know that you'll be able to answer easily because you consider yourself an authority so far on those. And other questions you may not know the answer to. Those are the questions that will direct your research. They identify for you, what do I still need to know about this particular topic or subject, and what should I answer before writing my essay? Journaling is something that students come to with hesitation. They say, well, how can journaling help me in, say, a chemistry class? And I would say that if you know that you're going to have papers due in your chemistry class, and you also know that chemistry isn't perhaps your strongest subject, what you might do is journal for the time that you're in that course. So for each class meeting, I would suggest taking a notebook and writing a reaction after the class meeting, writing down things that you understood, writing down things that you didn't understand, writing down questions that you have, writing reactions like, I was really, really bored during this lecture, or for the first time I felt like I understood what was going on, reactions like that. So then by the time you got to a midterm assignment, when your chemistry professor would say, okay, now you have to go to, you have to write a midterm paper, and you have to go to all of the topics that we covered in the first half of the class and pick one to write your paper about, you can go through your journal and see where were your strengths and your weaknesses. What did you identify with more, and what did you identify with less? And then you can pick the one that you feel more comfortable with, right? So for the future free writing exercises, what I would like you to do is feel free to do any of these other forms of pre-writing. You don't just have to free write. You could do brainstorming or clustering and mapping. With that, you might have to take a screenshot, or take a photo of your handwritten clustering and mapping and upload it, but you should feel free to do something else that feels more comfortable for you, because all of these free writing journal exercises that I give you are attempts to help you generate material for your essays. Planning is a stage of the writing process that a lot of students don't spend enough time on and are very hesitant to spend time on. They don't like writing outlines. They feel like they are not organic, that they are clunky. I don't like writing with outlines, but I do see their use. And I think in particular, if there's subject matter that you are struggling with, outlines are imperative. You really should do them for the subjects that you're not as strong in. Even if you don't like writing outlines, you're going to write one for your first essay in this class. And what I would like you to just remember as you play game and create your outline is that sometimes just the act of creating an outline can help give you direction with your writing, even if you don't follow it closely. And one of the things that I recommend for those people who like writing organically, who write, on the page, they just start creating an essay, whether it's on the computer or in a handwritten, format in a notebook, that when you write an outline, even if you're that person who likes to just generate kind of spontaneously, create the outline and then put it away. You don't have to look at it closely. You don't have to have it right by your side as you attempt to answer the prompt. But having done the outline, it will kind of stay with you in the back of your head as you're writing. And by virtue of having already kind of planned, your writing will become more organized as you go. Planning is important, especially when writing in-class essays, because you need to write as quickly and efficiently as possible, and an outline, no matter how brief, can help you do that. So in the next few slides, I'm going to show you how a strong thesis statement can act like an outline and direct the organization of your essay. So a thesis statement is a complete sentence that appears in the first paragraph of the essay. Some sophisticated essays don't have what we would identify as thesis statements. They have a thesis, they have a purpose, and that's apparent by the time we get to the end of the essay. But most college essays, most assignments that you're given, you should have a thesis statement in your essay. That's what your college professors are going to be looking for. So ideally, the thesis statement is the last sentence of the first paragraph, and it transitions us into the body of the essay. A thesis statement is not fact or set in stone, so I don't want you to worry so much about your thesis statement that it becomes intimidating and that you feel like you can't change your thesis statement. You can always change your stance or opinion about a subject. We do often in life. Some of us do it more than others, and then we're called flip-floppers in politics, but it is human to change your opinion once you get new facts, right? Once you know more about a situation, it's in fact intelligent and smart and adaptable to change your opinions and your beliefs based on new information. So remember that when you're creating your thesis statement initially, and also remember that too, you may find a more eloquent way to express the purpose of your essay as you're writing the body. All of a sudden, you know, that perfect thesis statement might hit you, so you can go back and change it. But I would suggest strongly that you begin your writing with a thesis statement. You kind of need to know where you're going when you begin writing your essay. You should, however, aim to answer your professor's question, the prompt, directly, and or tell the professor what you believe about the topic. Like, that's what should be done in the thesis statement. So if you're always trying to check your thesis statement by holding it up against the professor's prompt that you were given, you are going to be much more successful in your college writing, because professors are wanting you to answer the question, you know. All right, thesis equals topic plus controlling idea. The topic equals the subject of your essay, and the controlling idea is what you're saying, your opinion, or what you are observing about the topic. So I suggest using something called the rule of 3 to write your thesis statements. I ask that you identify the topic in the first half of your sentence and then list 3 specific items of support in your controlling idea. Now, this rule of 3 is not going to create really eloquent, beautiful writing. It's not going to create the stuff that will win awards and will be glorified in textbooks. However, it is a very efficient way of creating thesis statements when you have a short amount of time in college. When you have only a week to write a paper, when you have only an hour and 15 minutes in an in-class essay situation, the rule of 3 is really good to kind of attack the problem quickly and, like I said, efficiently. So I give you an example of a thesis statement here. Online classes are challenging because of the increased workload, possible and unpredictable technical difficulties, and student anonymity. The topic in that thesis statement is online classes are challenging, and the controlling idea is because of the increased workload, possible and unpredictable technical difficulties, and student anonymity. So there are 3 different points of support in that controlling idea. So, using your thesis as an outline, your 3 specific points of support will determine the supporting paragraphs in your 5-paragraph essay. So, your intro paragraph ends with the thesis. Online classes are challenging because of the increased workload, possible and unpredictable technical difficulties, and student anonymity. Your first body paragraph would be then about the increased workload, because it is the first item in your controlling idea. Then the second body paragraph would be about technical difficulties, because it is the second supporting item mentioned in your thesis statement. And then the third body paragraph is about the experience of being anonymous in a class, because it is the third and last point of support in your thesis statement. And then, of course, you would round off the essay with a concluding paragraph. Points of support come in many shapes and forms, through concrete examples, description, anecdotes, which are small stories that illustrate the topic, facts, and opinions and testimony from experts. When you are developing points of support, you're going to take those points of support that were in your thesis statement and give each of them their own supporting details. This is how you develop your body paragraphs in your essay. So I think the rule of 3 can help you when you are simply trying to generate material. Some of us have real problems with development. We have problems writing at length about a topic. If you think of numbers in your essay, you know, think of each paragraph as 5 sentences, an intro, 3 body sentences, and a conclusion. Then, you know, think of the essay in the same way. Intro, 3 body paragraphs, and then a conclusion. So then when you come to your body paragraphs, you'll know that you need 3 good supporting points for the supporting point that came from your thesis statement. So I gave you an example here. Body paragraph 1 is supposed to be about the increased workload. So point of support 1 for increased workload is you have to read all the responses by professor and student peers in the discussion board, and this takes more time than it would in the classroom. Then the second point of support for increased workload is you have to write all of your answers to questions down instead of speaking them aloud, and this takes more time too. Point of support number 3 for the increased workload is you need to proofread everything you write and type, and this takes a good amount of time as well. Evaluating and organizing points of support. So after you have drafted either in an outline or if you have actually written your essay, I would go through and evaluate your points of support. Cross out or delete items that are not directly related to the thesis. Sometimes they work their ways in there. Also, merely restating or rephrasing the original supporting point is not good support. It's called circular logic. So to say, the increased workload creates difficulty with an online class because there's so much more work than there is in a face-to-face class, that's just restating. You have to be very, very specific. Or wait, did I say it or not? Okay. The online class requires more work because there's more work than in a face-to-face class. That's restating. It's just using the sentence itself to support the sentence. So instead what you would want to do is point out how there is more work in an online class than in a face-to-face class. And we tried to point that out in the last slide by talking about discussion boards being more involved than in-class discussions, etc. You also want to cross out or delete items that are too general, broad, or assuming. Everyone hates taking tests. You may have a reader who doesn't mind taking tests, and since they've just disproven your sentence, they may not read further. You don't want to have these generalities that can be easily disproven. So if you see one of those appear, especially if you see the word everyone in your essay, that's usually a red light. You want to take that out and say most people, because that's a little bit more difficult to prove. Organize your points of support logically. Order of importance, or emphatic order, usually begin with the least important supporting detail and end with the most important. You're kind of building your case in that way. Order of time, chronological order, the order in which events occurred. This is important for narrative essays or anecdotes within other essay forms. And order of space, or spatial order, order in which items are encountered in space. And this occurs in process essays, like if you were explaining how to, well, rebuild a car engine, or descriptions of processes within other essay forms. Then, of course, you have to come to conclusions. Once you have developed all the support for your thesis statement, I have a lot of students who think that their conclusion needs to include a word-for-word repetition of the thesis statement. And that is clunky. It is unoriginal and uninspired, and it's kind of boring. So instead, try to rephrase your thesis. Go to the thesaurus and find synonyms for words that you used in your thesis statement. Try to summarize the main points of your essay instead of going through them as detailed as you did in the body of the essay. And then try to make your conclusion interesting and memorable by closing with a final observation, a prediction, a suggestion, a quotation from an expert or a well-known and respected intellectual, or perhaps even a call to action where you urge your reader to do something after reading your essay. And then lastly, you should look at the essays that we have read as models for your own work. Each essay is a good example of different rhetorical strategies, and some are even a mix of rhetorical strategies. So we are going to write a definition essay as our second short paper. But the first short paper is asking you to write a comparison contrast of a time that you were included and a time you were excluded. And so you will be comparing and contrasting those two times in your life, but in order to do that, you're also going to have to tell stories. So this first essay that you're writing is going to be a combination of the narrative rhetorical strategy and the comparison and contrast rhetorical strategy. And I've kind of defined what all of the rhetorical strategies that we've read so far are, and then given you examples of those. So the definition essay attempts to provide the most comprehensive and or challenging definition of a word or concept, and pride was an example of this. Division and classification is an essay that considers categories and labels we use in our everyday lives, such as growing up Asian in America. And then, of course, comparison and contrast compares and or contrasts two significantly alike and also significantly dissimilar persons, places, objects, concepts, or phenomena. And the example of that is 2 Ways to Belong to America. I mean, note that 2 Ways to Belong to America was definitely comparison contrast because the author was comparing her life with her sister's, but then she also had to tell the story of her life and her sister's life in order to do that. And then even I listed Only Daughter by Sandra Cisneros as the narrative example, but in that, Sandra Cisneros compares the way her father spoke about herself and the way her father spoke about her brothers. So, you know, it revealed insight about the human experience, but it also compared the way men and women are brought up, and in particular within this Mexican culture that she came from. So that's the end of the writing process lecture. It's kind of a substitute of what I would do in class, except that usually I don't talk at people in class, I engage in conversation. So it was important to me that I include the talking points that I would have used in my in-class discussion in this lecture, and then what I would ask of you is to combine what you've learned in this lecture with what you have also analyzed in the discussion boards, and synthesize all that and use it as you begin to write your first short essay for this class. Good luck, and I look forward to reading your responses within a week.